було видно розвал реактора. Тобто ми зазирнули в око вулкана, реактора, оце все всього.
Подлетаем к блоку. Держи, где дым идет? Где дым?
It was the world's worst nuclear accident and a catalyst for the collapse of the Soviet Union after the authorities tried to hide the truth of what happened from the world. 40 years after the disaster, Chernobyl is once again a flashpoint. The plant remains one of the most radioactive places on Earth, but it's caught in an active war zone. As Putin's Russia continues missile strikes against the country's power grid. I've come to Ukraine to understand what's at risk and why the events of April 1986 carry such a terrible legacy.
Ready? Control room of Unit 4.
Oh, wow. I think what's most powerful for me is just being in a room, in a place, and next to a button that, when it was pressed, changed the world.
Today, it's a heavily restricted area, only accessible with special permission, and the reactors can only be accessed safely with protective clothing and for a limited time. But in 2022, Russian troops crossed this toxic landscape as they launched their full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Unfortunately, we're really limited in where we can film here because it's an active war zone and there's Ukrainian military everywhere.
From 1922 to 1991, Russia and 14 other republics, including Ukraine, Estonia and Belarus, were known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Soviet Union. After World War II, the USSR began investing heavily in nuclear power. By 1984, the Chernobyl plant had 4 fully operational reactors and was hailed as a triumph of Soviet engineering.
Иногда спрашивают, может ли взорваться атомная электростанция. Ну, я могу с полной ответственностью заявить, что это совершенно исключено. Ну, невозможно такого себе даже представить.
To house the thousands of workers and their families, a utopian planned city was built, Pripyat. I want to speak to people who lived through the disaster. Many are sharing their stories with the world for the first time.
I'd show my photo.
Oh, yeah. It's in this?
Yeah.
This is your primary school?
It has said it. It's me.
It's young Dimitro. Look how happy you are.
Yeah. In a blue shorts and T-shirt.
Dimitro was just 9 years old in 1986.
It's just good memories, of course. Pripyat was such a city with a brilliant future, a lot of work, new buildings, flats, a lot of children.
It was fun.
It was very optimistic.
An optimistic place.
It was also here in Pripyat that Chernobyl turbine engineer Serhiy met local teacher Irina.
In my heart there's a fire, a burning heart.
От, і відразу її замітив, і побачив, і подумав, ще яка красива дівчинка.
Love at first sight.
Ні.
Не в тому справа.
Положил глаз.
Serhiy and Irina dated, met at discos and at the city's other main attraction.
Це було місце спілкування. Не тільки тренування. От, люди там спілкувались, знайомились, потім одружувались, потім дітей народжували.
Serhiy asked Irina to marry him, and the wedding date was set, Saturday, 26th of April, 1986. The day before the wedding, engineers were preparing for an important safety test of one of Unit 4's turbines. Intense pressure to deliver Chernobyl's fourth reactor on time meant the test hadn't been completed successfully before it was declared operational 2.5 years earlier. In the afternoon, the test was postponed. So the day shift went home, and a night shift, staffed by engineers who had less experience of these tests, came in and started the procedure around midnight. I want to meet someone who saw those events unfold firsthand.
Hey, Nikolai, show us where you were when you were working that night.
В ту ночь во время взрыва я находился вот здесь. Здесь был блочный щит управления.
Nikolai was a lead engineer in the turbine hall. To conduct the procedure, engineers turned off the automatic shutdown systems at Reactor 4. They began the test at 1:23 a.m. Saturday, 26th of April. But something was wrong. There wasn't enough power in the system, and the reactor's core had become unstable. An engineer pressed the emergency button to shut down the reactor manually. But instead of a shutdown, there was an explosion, followed shortly by a second one.
У нас было как землетрясение, содрогание под ногами. И мы увидели, как обрушивается кровля на седьмой турбине. Это как раз 4-й блок. И получается, что сквозняк в нашу сторону, и эта вся пыль пошла в нашу сторону. И сработала звуковая сигнализация, сирена.
Nikolai raced to the control room of Reactor 4.
Мы стояли возле ведущего инженера управления реактором, и он лежал за пультом, но он не смотрел ни на пульт, ни что, он вот так вот лежал. Я не понял, или ему тоже уже было плохо, или он просто понял, что случилось, и ему было от этого плохо. Но он тоже один из первых умер.
Were you not afraid?
Умом я понимал, что это опасно и страшно. Страха не было совершенно. А я уже бросил курить, 5 месяцев не курил. Думаю, ё-моё, умирать скоро, а тут я курить бросил.
As the sun rose on Saturday, the true extent of the damage became clear.
Справа блок номер, центральный зал блока номер 4. Включи. Выше, Вова, держи это место, держи. Держи, где дым идет, где дым.
Я прокинувся о 6 ранку. От, я виходжу на вулицю і бачу таку картину. На виїзді із двору стоять військові і міліція. От, у військових були протигази.
The white flashes on this footage gathered that day were caused by extreme levels of radiation.
Моя мама дочекалась 9-ї ранку і подзвонила місцевій владі і запитала, що робити з весіллям. Їй сказали, без паніки, всі заплановані мероприятия по городу проводити.
It seems unbelievable to us today, but Dmytro, like the other children, went to school as normal on that Saturday.
mother, she blamed my father that he let me and my sister go to the school as others, but he explained that it can't be in an other way because not produce panic.
By the afternoon, Serhii and Irina were going ahead with what would be the last wedding and the final chapter of this once utopian city. The couple had been taught a traditional waltz for their first dance.
Але після того, що ми про тої звістки, про яку ми знали, що така трагедія трапилась вже в Прип'яті, ми на першому такті просто вийшли вже в кафе і збились, і просто обійнялись, і танцювали, обійнявшись, не вальс.
It's hard to imagine now, but this was the beating heart of the city. It's the palace of culture. 50,000 people here, eating, drinking, having lessons. They even said that they had the best disco in Ukraine here. And now it's so quiet.
On Sunday, 36 hours after the accident, the official evacuation began.
Целью обеспечения полной безопасности людей и в первую очередь детей возникает необходимость провести временную эвакуацию жителей города в пункты Киевской области.
Ми поїхали на 3 дні, а поїхали на все життя, з'ясувалося.
Today, there's a 1,000 square mile exclusion zone around this site. It's estimated it won't be safe for human habitation for 20,000 years.
We've got a device called a dosimeter, and that measures different types of radiation. And if it goes above a certain level, then it'll beep and alert us. But this area is higher radiation than you would get in everyday life. So you can't stay here. People cannot live here. You can't spend a long amount of time here. You can only be here for a short amount of time, which is why we're just in for hours to film and then out.
Поврежден один из атомных реакторов.
Monday, 2 days after the accident.
Good evening. The Soviet Union admitted this evening that there's been an accident at one of its nuclear power stations.
Over the following days, a radioactive cloud from Chernobyl covered Europe.
Добрый вечер, товарищи.
18 days after the disaster, the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev finally acknowledged the accident publicly.
На сегодня 299 человек госпитализированы с диагнозом лучевой болезни разной степени тяжести. 7 из них скончались.
Within 3 months, many of the engineers and firefighters who tackled the disaster on the night died from acute radiation syndrome. Civilian evacuees from Pripyat ended up in Kyiv, where Dr. Alla Shapiro worked as a pediatrician.
We were not prepared at all. We did not know that it was mandatory to give potassium iodine in the first 6 to 8 hours after people were exposed to radiation. Most of the children did not receive potassium iodine, and they developed thyroid cancer after, I would say, 7 to 8 years.
Dr. Shapiro blames the authorities for this lack of guidance.
I went to the medical library, but the shelves were surprisingly empty. So I asked the librarian, can you please give me some literature about radiation? And she said, no, I can't. We got an order from the above to take all the books that have word radiation off the shelves.
To prevent further leaks of radiation, thousands of helicopter flights dropped sand and other materials on the reactor. Flying overhead, pilots were exposed to colossal levels of radiation, and there were accidents. The authorities brought in hundreds of thousands of people from all over the Soviet Union to contain the disaster. Known as the liquidators, they say they weren't told what they would have to do, and they had no idea of the danger facing them. The plan was to use machinery to remove highly radioactive material that had been blown from Reactor 4 onto the roof of Reactor 3. But the extreme radiation levels meant the machines broke down. This work had to be done to contain the disaster. And the agonizing decision was made to send men up to do the work.
Ta siis jah, sümboliseeribki seda, et mis on katastroofi tagajärg.
I've come to meet two of the liquidators who survived, Jan and Ren from Estonia, which was then part of the USSR.
See, üle peavad lihtsalt me jah, kahepoolsed tinaplaadid ja jalge vahele ka tinaplaat. Ja siis...
Polaks oli päris raske.
Ja see oli päris raske.
Kilo või rohkem.
Pähe pandi tavaline ehitajamüts, meil on nõukogude ajal see ehitusmüts oli prillid. Need tavalised niisugused ette kindad käes ja dosimeeter taskus, siis pulk dosimeeter.
Вот вам отводится 1 минута для того, чтобы решить следующую задачу. 4 блока надо взять, вот они, видите, и бросить их в пропасть, в разрыв. Но близко нельзя подходить. Итак, вам 1 раз в жизни надо эту минуту отработать так, чтобы осталась память и сделали дело. Минута. Желаю вам успехов. И комиссар. Так, следующий партия готовится.
In just 1 minute, the liquidators could potentially receive their entire lifetime allowance of radiation.
Ja kui sinna katusele läksid, siis keegi kurat aru ei saanud, miski see nüüd täpselt oli. Võtsid esimese ette juhtuva ja lükkasid alla ja tuli tagasi. Et selles mõttes seal ei olnud aega mõelda, et nüüd hakkad otsima, kus see minu oma täpselt on või mis see.
Seal pead nii kiiresti tegutsema, seal pole aega sul tunda midagi.
Akuraatno!
Nii palju, kui nüüd tükke jõudsid lahti varutada seal ja grafiiti, mis oli seal.
Once liquidators had been exposed to 25 rentigens of radiation, they were supposed to be taken out of action.
Mina kui ohvitser, minu meelest ma sain ka kuskil minu 25 röntgenit sai septembri alguses täis. Ma sain 2 päeva laagris olla, siis tuli pataljoni komandör major, ütles, et tead ohvitseridele see ei mõju, et sa oled tööle tagasi.
Nearly 4,000 men were sent onto the roof during the summer of 1986. The effects would stay with them long after the cleanup, and they weren't always physical.
Ma mõtlen, et kõige hullem oligi 91. aastal, ma mäletan, oli ehmatav oli Fakt, et 1991. aastaks oli surnud 51 meest, neist 17 enesetappu.
What surprises me most is the official death toll, just 31. But as no comprehensive long-term medical study was set up at the time, we may never know the true number. The UN says 8.4 million Soviet citizens were exposed to Chernobyl radiation, and in 2005, it predicted 4,000 people would die as a result. Although other organizations claim the death toll will be tens of thousands.
I had significant surgery and then very intense chemotherapy. And now I'm here.
Dr. Shapiro, who had colon cancer in 2011, still wonders what might have happened if the authorities had been more open.
Growing up in the Soviet Union, everything was based on lies. So this was not something that really surprised me because everything was covered and lies came from the top. This was painful because we couldn't do our job. The cases of death could be avoided if the information won't be hidden.
5 power plant engineers were blamed for the disaster. But we now know the Soviets were aware of and covered up systemic problems with this particular design of nuclear power plant. Declassified KGB documents revealed there had already been a partial meltdown in Reactor 1 in 1982. A concrete sarcophagus over Reactor 4 was completed in December 1986. But Chernobyl is still highly radioactive.
Ready? Control room of Unit 4.
Oh, wow.
Don't touch anything.
Exploring Chernobyl as it is now is to step back in time.
This one is just haunting. Smashed glass, like a toothless grin. It's obviously silent, but you can just imagine the phones ringing, the lights flashing, the alarms bleeping on the night, people running back and forth. I think what's most powerful for me is just being in a room, in a place, and next to a button that when it was pressed, changed the world. There was before Chernobyl and then there was afterwards. And to stand in the place where it all happened. It's pretty incredible.
The anger about the disaster, the cover-up and the failures of the state damaged public trust and fueled political dissent, particularly in Ukraine and Belarus, the countries most affected by Chernobyl. The pro-independence movement that grew off the back of the Chernobyl protests sped up the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, once again, Chernobyl has become a battleground. In 2022, invading Russian troops held staff at the plant hostage for 5 weeks. They laid mines, dug trenches in the radioactive grounds, and the Ukrainian government reported a spike in radiation levels. Nikolay's son Dmitry was called up to the Ukrainian army shortly after.
Он сказал, что он как должен защищать свою родину. Вот у него было такое патриотическое чувство, что он просто обязан защищать свою родину, и он ушел на войну.
Dmitry was sent to fight on the front line, but contact with him was lost in September 2023.
И вот уже 2,5 года его нету ни в списках военнопленных, не в списке погибших. Тяжелая для нас очень утрата. Мы надеемся, что, может быть, он еще живой. Молим Бога об этом. Ну, ждем, надеемся. Но шансов все меньше, конечно.
It's an air raid siren coming from the plant, which means that there's missiles or drones coming overhead. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come here to Chernobyl because it's on the main flight path down to Kyiv. Workers monitor the site on rotating shifts to control their exposure to radiation and ensure it stays within safe limits. Reactor 4 is now covered by a huge structure that stops radiation once again leaking into the atmosphere. Last year, staff feared the worst when a drone smashed into it.
Да, да. Задувай.
So the silver box up there, that is where the Russian drone hit. So you can't see the damage. It's through that silver box. But look how close it was to the actual reactor just beside it. This room is the most terrifying, I think.
Dmytro, who eventually became an engineer at Chernobyl, is now the head of a local volunteer defence unit.
So this gun you and locals have been using to shoot down drones.
Yes.
The same type of drones that hit Chernobyl, that hit the sarcophagus.
Yes. These drones try to hit heating systems, water supply systems, and energy supply systems.
While it's this cold?
Yes, especially in these weather conditions, it's very critical for our population.
In Putin's Russia, just like in the Soviet Union, ordinary Russians aren't being told the whole truth about what's happening in Ukraine. It becomes clear when I talk to them that now, just as then, Dmytro and his fellow volunteers feel they're fighting an existential battle.
Population of Russia, they are slaves. They do nothing without orders. For more than 30 years, we're independent and we care about our freedom and we try to protect not only our lives, but our right to make a choice, and we try to protect this choice even now.
I spent so long thinking about the past. I just didn't think about what it must be like to work at Chernobyl today, how difficult that would be. Obviously, you're working at the site of one of the worst nuclear accidents in the world. But these guys are doing it in a war zone. The threat of missile attacks, of drone attacks, of even being taken hostage. There were Russian tanks in front of the building we've just been in. People were held hostage for 5 weeks. And yet they keep turning up. They keep turning up and doing their job, which is to keep that radiation in the confinement facility. And that's just not for Ukraine. That's to keep all of us safe.